So, in the previous episode, I started to talk about morning anxiety patterns and how I would wake up without noticing and sort of start to go into this habitual mode of thinking about conversations I've had in the past and how this person said that and I responded in a certain way, and how perhaps maybe I could have responded better to serve the conversation or better so that I seemed like a more effective person in the conversation. So, for example, like my image came out better. And so that I could, for instance, put myself in the narrative of that memory as like a sort of a hero in the conversation. And really, that is something that I might do in the span of 5 seconds. And I believe that other people would be doing this as well. They just wouldn't necessarily label it like that. They would just conjure up that conversation they had with a friend or a sibling or a parent and the emotions of it, the anger, the small instances of anger, like how could she have said that? Or how could she not have concluded that, for example? So they'll conjure those up and the feelings associated with that and try to bring themselves, that's what I do, bring myself out of it in a sort of imagined scenario, out as like the hero. And so what I noticed is that I would do that, and I would do it for many conversations in the span of 5-10 minutes while lying in my bed, still half asleep. And my head would start to get warm and heavy. And then at the same time, while doing this, what I'm just calling the replay game, while doing this, I might also be scrolling through Instagram, also a habit, looking at what people have, looking at people's lives. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes it's not. It's not the right moment for it, especially if I'm not peering into what's happening internally when I'm looking at these very selected images. This is what we want to show the world. If you're mindful that that's the case, then that can be used as a tool. This is part of what I think I want to explore today. But when you're not mindful and you see someone in a body that you wish you had, or in a house or in a relationship that you wish you were in, and you're not mindful of what's happening in that interaction between you and your phone, you can start to feel the negative emotions of, I want that, I don't have that, therefore I'm feeling pain. And scroll through enough posts, and sure enough, when you get out of bed, you are in a state of self-loathing. And so perhaps my first instinct when sort of noticing such a ritual, let's say, a morning unconscious ritual, however you might like to call it, is, oh, that's self-loathing. I'm going to just stop completely doing that. And I think that has some utility. I think that might be useful for some instances, for some people. But I also took a step back from that and started to think, hold on a second, is that something I actually want to do? Do I want to stop completely playing the replay game of playing old memories and position myself in those conversations, or of wishless thinking, of looking at things that I don't have that I might like to have one day or be a part of? Do I want to completely stop those things? Which is something I might do if I start to associate them as a sort of one-to-one relationship with self-loathing. And I think people might do that because I've heard a lot of different posts and videos and podcasts blanket, not insult, but reprimand, let's say, social media in air quotes, for having that effect on people's minds. And I think certainly there is a role that it plays in the negative emotions that people are talking about when they talk about social media in air quotes. But I think we need to be careful, or at least I want to be careful in labeling that practice or ritual as self-loathing. Because when used in a different context, I think it can be really useful. It can be a tool. For instance, the replay game. When you're not lying in bed the first moments that you wake up, not just putting the semblances of who you are back together after having come from the state of sleep. When you're not in that off-balance state of consciousness and you plan to dedicate some time to reflect about certain, let's say, important interactions or conversations you've had in the past and try to learn from them. I think by definition, that can be extremely useful to you, to the people around you, because you're in that learning mindset. And when you switch on that learning mindset and you're quote unquote healthy about it, then ideally, I think what I like to do is accept that there were certain reasons for the way everyone in that supposed interaction acted and for what they said. It could have been the way they were feeling that day or the way I was feeling that day, or could have been a result of certain things that occurred in the hours before the conversation and that put the players of that conversation and their mindset in a certain mode or mood to respond in the ways that they did. And so to accept things happen for a reason and to go and try to rewrite that as though it's something that could have been easily done differently is tricky. But instead to try to imagine a slightly better situation by asking questions like, how could I have acted better in that situation? Or how could I have come into that situation with a better energy or mindset? Say I also extended the reflection to events that led up to the chat. Say I had a long day at work. I didn't take breaks. I had not slept too well the night before. I didn't eat too well. Came to meet, let's say, with my friends, and we ended up in some kind of argument. Hey, maybe I could have, first of all, taken a note of that. Like, guys, I'm not in the best state of mind to have this argument. Let's postpone it to another time. Or maybe I know that there's some serious chat coming up between my friends or even my family or others. And so I will try to pre-plan how, or rather arriving to that conversation, which I sense might be happening, in the best state of mind I can possibly manage. So perhaps I'll have a nap if I haven't slept too well. I'll try to make sure that my food choices are aligned with what I recognize as feeling good. And that way, perhaps, hey, even just me as a mind and body showing up to that conversation, I've made it a little bit better. And so the way I react and interact with these people is going to be a little bit better. So really, I want to drive it back to that point about be careful. This is for me, but if someone else who's listening is benefiting from this, that's amazing. I want to be careful with labeling that habit, in this case, the replay game, as a bad thing. And I think it would be really easy for me to do that and just say, I'm not going to have that kind of self-talk. I'm going to disconnect from thinking about conversations in the past because it leads to self-loathing. I end up feeling bad. And then I feel if you're following with me so far, that can limit some pretty important moments of self-growth that come out of reflecting on things that have passed and how you can serve those moments a little bit better if something similar like that comes in the future. And I think the same thing applies for the wishless thinking, the scrolling through social media, through things like Instagram and seeing things that you want or might like to have in the future. And doing that in a space of, or in a mindset of, I'm calmly looking at these things and perhaps noticing the emotions that are arising when I'm looking at these things, accepting them. I'm accepting that there's some pain there because I don't have this thing that I want. And maybe I'm setting a small plan. What would I like to do this week to take a step towards this thing that I want? And in that way, you're using these habitual things in a controlled space, which you are active in, and it really becomes a tool rather than a hindrance. And I felt yesterday when I recorded the first episode, I had these sort of thoughts about this. There would be a sort of instinctive, let's say, response to take that and label it as self-loathing and just cut ties with it. And it would be so easy to do that. Just do it again and again and again. Say that's self-loathing again and again. And eventually you would find yourself doing it less. And I really just had this sense of, no, hold on a second, maybe there's some benefit there. And I felt that for this podcast, for the purpose of what is happening in these sort of reflections, that it would be important to dig deep into those moments where I sort of stop on something and feel a need to go deeper and see what's happening there. And so I hope whoever is listening that there is this sense of be careful when you label something as completely bad. Try to reflect a bit about that, why you're doing that, to try to avoid a negative emotion. Okay, that's what I would have done if I just wanted to make my mornings better and avoid that. Okay, avoid it. This is a great first step to recognize that some habit of some of your mornings is bothering you a little bit. But when you take that second step, just be a bit patient with yourself. Allow yourself to interact with the habits that you just become aware of, that you were unconscious to, that you might have been practicing for years. Take a beat, see what's been happening there, why you we're doing that in the first place. And maybe if there's some benefit to it, try to compartmentalize and plan for a time where you are actually going to engage in those habits, but in a conscious and controlled space.